No price talk and no Lambos. This is not another crypto podcast. Welcome to Ignition. I'm your host, Jillian, and each week we will be looking at the problems solved by blockchain. I'll be going deep with the people building the apps and communities which are changing the world around us. Welcome to another edition of Ignition, the Eos Dublin podcast. Now, today I have a real treat. We have a very well-known man on the line in America at the moment. Am I right in saying that?
That is correct, yes.
Yes. You travel a lot. But I have on the line Luke Stokes. So, Luke, perhaps you'd like to maybe introduce yourself. I'm sure you don't need to, but maybe just give a little bit of background about who you are and what you are.
Oh, thank you. Like those introductions are always kind of funny when people are like, "Yeah, you're a celebrity." Like I remember one time, we were walking through the airport. We had visited Puerto Rico, which we're moving to at the end of the year, and someone who knew me from Steemit came up to me and said, "Excuse me, are you Luke Stokes?" And it was just a funny moment for me. And later, my 9-year-old son is like, "Dad, you're famous because somebody recognized you in the airport." My name is Luke. I've been involved in technology for a long time. I built my first websites in 1996. Majored in computer science at University of Pennsylvania. Started my own e-commerce company called FoxyCart with my business partner. It's an e-commerce shopping cart system, and did that for 10 years. And I sold it at the beginning of this year because I was just so passionately excited about the blockchain space. I've been involved in it for more than 5 years.
Oh, you're one of the early ones. Oh, you're lucky. Yeah,
I bought my first Bitcoin in January 2013. I spent $50 and I got 2.5 Bitcoin.
Wow.
But and that took me, being in the payment space with e-commerce and dealing with the drama of the credit card companies, the payment gateways, the merchant providers, the banks. I just, I'm learning about central banking and fiat currency and all this kind of stuff. I was just like, oh my goodness. Well, here's the problem in the world, right? This is what funds all these terrible wars we have. And I just started kind of leaning more and more towards looking for voluntary solutions to improve human well-being on the planet. And so Bitcoin, I started to get excited about. And I started a local meetup here in Nashville, Tennessee. And, I went through the whole kind of price rise up to 1,200 and then the crash down to 250 in 2013, 2014.
And did that put you off then? What did you
I sold and then bought right back. I held through that entire thing. I did. I sold like right at the top and I was like, screw this. I don't want fiat currency. And I bought right back in. And then I just held the whole way down. And it was a little frustrating because we could have actually paid off our house at the time.
Wow.
But then, I just was like, why would I sell when the future value of this is so much more? I just knew that this is the future. And so I held through that and it kind of lost a bit of momentum. I was really trying hard to get all of our FoxyCart customers. We had 2,000 stores doing e-commerce. And I was like, hey, we have a BitPay integration. Just click a couple buttons and you can accept Bitcoin. And people were just not on board.
Yeah. But they're still saying things like, oh, it's a Ponzi scheme or...
Yeah, it's just like the early internet. The early internet's only used for crime and all these things. It was the same narrative. And so I got a little discouraged. But then along came Steemit around, 2016. A friend of mine who I'd been involved in, actually, we worked together to start a nonprofit that wasted a bunch of my time as well. It was like a Bitcoin related thing. And so he's like, man, this is the thing you've been waiting for. You got to check out Steemit. So my friend Sean King told me about it, and Bill Butler, who's involved with BitShares. They both were like, hey, Luke, I know you're going to like this. So I created an account in the summer of 2016. And immediately I was like, this is the killer app for mass adoption of cryptocurrency. I mean, everybody knows how to blog. Everybody knows how to write on Facebook or Twitter or Medium. So I got really excited about Steemit. I started using it quite a bit. And then eventually I had a number of people ask me, hey, how come you aren't a witness? A witness is the block producer on the Steem blockchain. And eventually I was like, well, I know how to program, but I'm not really a DevOps guy. I've done server management, infrastructure management, all that. I'm just not my favorite. And eventually I just realized, well, I should probably just go ahead and do this. So I set up some servers and kind of have been a Steem witness now for over a year. It was actually April 2016 when I started.
Because I joined Steem last year. When I was the same, I'm a writer. Ooh, but it's a different style of writing, I find, because I think you have to write on Steem. I would write long articles, and then people would say, well, cut them up in little pieces and you get more following and votes. I'm going, well, it's meant to be read together. So fashion journalist in me going, no, it's a long form piece of journalism. It's, you're meant to have it. And so although I enjoyed it, I haven't used it that much recently, I have to confess now. I love the idea.
It's an interesting thing. And it brings up an interesting point about like, currently is only a 7-day payout. So people who are doing long evergreen content, especially video producers, they're like, wait, this doesn't make sense to me. But the flip side of that is, well, okay, but you could go post on Medium and get nothing. So at least if you get, rewards. It's, that's cryptocurrency. You can buy a coffee, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah. And what's funny about the Steem blockchain as well is it's whatever people want it to be. There's like D-like is an example where it's just link sharing, a little summary, and that's it. There's video content, there's long form content, short form content, whatever it wants to be. So it's kind of a neat thing because when people say, hey, you need to do this in order to do that, you can just be like, or not. Like, it's decentralized. We can do whatever we want, but however people respond is what it is. And I think a lot of creative action is best motivated by intrinsic motivations. Extrinsic motivations and motivational psychology generally like hinder creative activity. So oftentimes when people are like chasing those rewards and you're changing what their style is in order to hit them, often they'll find their creativity going away, and that may be one of the reasons you're no longer excited about it. I remember there was a study they did with kids where they were drawing, and when they would pay them, they stopped doing the drawing, unless they would get paid. But when they didn't pay them, they're like, yeah, I love drawing. It's art. It's awesome. And they did it for their own internal reasons.
That's interesting, isn't it? So maybe I approach it the wrong way. I know also I wasn't that active on it. I would post and run away.
Oh, yes.
And that I know that's the killer. You're meant to be there and engaged and active and talking to the community. And I would just I'm too busy, post and run away, and which would meant that I wouldn't get the full sort of experience. I have met friends from there, Irish folk on there, so it has been good that way. I've met several people, and it was very nice at the very start because. And I was saying, I only met it like last August, I think, or September. And I went, oh, it's so exciting. Not Facebook. So exciting. Not Facebook. So, and as a witness, do you have a role in what you have to do as opposed to, what are you doing? You're block producing, but what else does a witness do?
Yeah, a witness does block production, and it's just similar to EOS. The way that you become a witness or a block producer is that you have to have a reputation that you build. Essentially, the main value asset that a block producer has is trust. And so you have to build social currency, you have to build reputation and identity so people can trust that you're going to secure their investment by, so obviously first that you have to have technical excellence and capacity to run the servers and the backup servers and everything needed for block production. You have to stay up to date with the GitHub repositories, code changes that are going out, bug fixes, things like that. So you have to be really engaged with, in this case, Steem Incorporated, just like the EOS block producers are really engaged with Block One. And as changes are being proposed, they're basically on call 24/7. Whether that's managing their nodes if a node goes down, or being up to date on latest updates and stuff like that. So it's a kind of technical job, but it's also a social job in terms of it. I've heard it described as actually being like a blockchain politician. As kind of silly as that may sound, you're kind of representing the token holders who vote for you in delegated proof of stake to secure the blockchain. And so you have to kind of have a vision for why you're better than someone else. Like, why would somebody vote for you? And so my kind of shtick on the Steem blockchain is that, having had a lot of experience in the cryptocurrency space for a while, also being a programmer, so technical comprehension of what's going on with blockchains and cryptocurrency, and also being more kind of like a philosophical thinker as far as macroeconomics and voluntarism and how, potentially nation-state governments and their monopoly on violence may not be the best approach for increasing human well-being on the planet. And so I think I've kind of gathered a following of people who want to see this decentralized technology used for good. And so that I've just kind of built a following through my content and through my kind of, for lack of a better word, I guess, thought leadership. I realize that it's kind of an overused term, but just the other day, people were still referencing a post I did a year ago, or almost 2 years ago now, about how the Steem currency is more important than steemit.com, the website, which is just a reference implementation of what's possible in the blockchain. So just kind of putting out content like that, providing some vision and leadership for the community, has been rewarded by people that want to see me get funded through block rewards to continue being a member. And
so if someone wants to find you on Steemit, what's your handle, or how do they find you? How do they follow you?
Luke Stokes. And it's the same for my Twitter account. Same for, most things I'm just Luke Stokes.
Okay.
Because I feel like identity and reputation are important, and I try to be the same offline, online, on-chain, off-chain. Just I'm me. And,
you're me. Well, I quite like that too, because I have my name everywhere. I'm a journalist. That's part of the reason why as well. But it's quite funny. People have all these little handles, and I'm kind of going, who are you now again? Sorry, remind me. And I quite like, I'm like you too as well. It's like I'm a journalist and I'm a broadcaster, and so I want people to know that that's me. Whether I'm fighting with them for my broadband, maybe not that way, or online. So tell me then. So that's all the Steemit stuff, and you're still active on that as well. You're still busy being a witness on the Steemit site.
Yes, definitely.
Mm.
Like actually just a couple of days ago, I just rolled out a release candidate, a new version of the Steam consensus code, and I'm testing it on one of my backup nodes. It's a interesting thing. Just yesterday, actually, I published a post about time boxing because I just have so many responsibilities, both to my family and to the different organizations and communities I'm adding value to, that I'm realizing like, wow, I'm using Trello, I'm using time clocks. Like I'm really recognizing how important it is because I just have so many things, so many cool things I get to be a part of.
Yes, yeah. We were talking just before we hit the record button that you would consider yourself quite a libertarian.
Yeah, libertarian is an interesting word because some people, whether you use a big L or not, they all get like, some people think of the Libertarian Party as a voting party, and I'm actually, and I know we talked about this briefly. Like, I'm not much of a supporter of the current nation-state government system, and this idea that, like, as much as people love to talk about the wonders of democracy, especially compared to previous forms of social and cultural organization, such as feudalism or whatever, or divine right of kings, or all these different methods we've used in the past. I also think it has the potential to be, two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for dinner, right? The classic quote from Churchill that democracy is the worst government except all the others,
Yeah.
And so,
I was going to quote that actually, your main thing.
So I'm careful within my community not to generally say, oh, libertarian, because I don't actually participate currently in nation state voting. I think it actually gives that process a level of like legitimacy that then allows them to say we have the consent of the governed to go do things that I personally think are deplorable. So I'm currently in a place in my life where I'm kind of saying I'm exploring other mechanisms for organizing humanity and having on-chain governance, and actually having a situation where a large chunk of my funds don't go towards the military-industrial complex, as an example, and killing people with drone strikes in other countries. And so I don't like necessarily the libertarian as like a political movement ideal. I've been more labeled a voluntarist or
I like that. Yes.
And that's also basically a friendlier way to say anarchist. And a lot of people really the word anarchy or anarchist, they think it's, Molotov cocktails and somebody spreading, chaos and destruction. But ultimately, when you look back at it, the word actually means without archons, and it means without leaders, without rulers, without hierarchy. It's the idea that no human being has the right to rule over or dominate and own another human being. All human interactions should be voluntary, and we don't have the right to initiate violence and force against someone else. So we can't actually vote in other people to do it for us. We can't delegate a right that we ourselves don't have. And so kind of as I've been exploring moral philosophy, ethics, and virtue and all this stuff, I've kind of reframed my own connection with reality. And I mentioned briefly that we're moving to Puerto Rico. A part of the reason for that is Act 20 and 22 allows me to kind of escape a lot of federal taxes and use that money to better support things that I think are going to improve the world, such as creating DACs.
Yes,
so I'm
which
really
leads us nicely into our next piece of the interview, because you're one of the launch members of the Eos Dac. So let's talk about DACs, distributed autonomous communities. How do they work?
Well, we're going to find out. That is the big question.
Here's the theory. How should they work? How do you think they might work?
Yeah, it's a great discussion. Just to back up just slightly, the concept of the DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, or the DAC, decentralized company, decentralized corporation, these have been around for just a few years. And Dan Larimer was a big part of kind of formulating this. Vitalik Buterin has talked about it quite a bit as well. A lot of people in the cryptocurrency blockchain space look at this and say, oh man, that's the hope for the future. That's exciting. But there hasn't been a really good example that we can point to and say, there's one doing well. When you say DAO, most people now think of the big hack on Ethereum where, millions and millions of dollars were lost. So it doesn't have the best reputation at the point, but what's amazing is even after that type of event, people are still excited about the potential of it. And in a nutshell, what essentially it is, and we've taken this C in Eos Dac and made it more community-based. And what it essentially means is, and you can go on Wikipedia and read about DACs and what it actually says. But the idea that the mechanisms for governance that a community or an organization, a nonprofit, a government, a corporation, whatever, come together to agree on, get put on a blockchain. So there's actually smart contract code, actual software that runs autonomously. And when we say autonomously, meaning you don't need human beings to interact with it. It's just like as long as the blockchain is running, that code is running. And that code actually then defines the structure for how the members of that community are going to interact with each other. And so what I'll do is just kind of break down a little bit about how Eos Dac is structured. And this is just kind of one vision for how a DAC could operate. And then that might explain a little bit more in concrete terms what a DAC is. And then from there, our goal, our why, the mission for why we exist, not only as we want to be an excellent block producer because we really love the EOS.io platform and we love that technology and we think it's going to be the best platform for DACs, but we also want to be a DAC enabler. And so we want to build open source technology for all of these people around the world who want to build DACs to be able to build DACs. So essentially, the way we're doing it is the token holders of the EOS Dac token have the ability to go to members.eosdac.io and register. And in that registration process, they're shown a 20-page constitution that we worked on quite a bit with our lawyers and
so
everyone else.
You want people to read it.
Absolutely. We want people to
not just accept,
Yes. Like we actually hashed the version of the Constitution that we were showing them, and we put that on the blockchain. And we're really trying to move the whole space forward to say this is an actual agreement that you're coming to with the other members of the DAC. And in that agreement, in that Constitution, talks about your role as a member once you register. So now it's like there's not going to be any ambiguity. We could point to that moment in time where it said, hey, we agreed to these shared aspects of how we're going to interact. And in there, you can then take your tokens, much like you vote for an EOS block producer, you can vote for an EOS Dac custodian. And the top 12 custodians by stoic weighted vote every 7 days will be kind of in charge of the DAC for those 7 days. And that includes the EOS.io multi-signature permissions on the funds for the DAC. And so it's a real thing. I mean, they are the ones, and they're going to have to, there's different voting thresholds as defined in the Constitution for things that they now have control to do. And what their main responsibility is essentially approving or denying worker proposals created by the community members. So any community member can come and say, hey, I want to add value to EOS Dac. I want to add value to EOS.io. I want to add value to the cryptocurrency space in general or the DAC space in general. And they say, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my deliverable. Here's how long it's going to take. And here's how much I want to get paid. And if it's awesome and it adds value, the custodians will vote it in. And then they do the work. They deliver the work. The custodians will look at it and say, okay, is this done or not? And as part of that proposal, they're actually going to submit an expert or an arbitrator who's going to evaluate as a third party whether the work is done well. So if there's a conflict between the DAC and a worker, the expert could come in and through a multi-signature contract say, oh, okay, we're going to go ahead and pay this guy or girl, or we're not going to pay him. And that's a really cool system that, is hopefully going to eliminate a lot of the drama we see in the current legal structure where there's all these conflicts and disagreements and there's no mechanism for actually dealing with them.
And what about if you put every 7 days, does that mean that a whole bunch of new custodians could come in and tell your man, we don't like your project? Is that possible?
It is. And these are one of the conflicts. And that's, again, why that third party is so important. Because maybe, the project takes 2 months and there's a rotation of custodians through the process. But the custodians, according to the Constitution, are also committing to honor the agreements that they've made as the DAC.
Okay. Right. So, yeah.
We get into some of the weeds here. It's not really the weeds. It's actually probably one of the most important things we're figuring out at the moment is that the DAC itself has no personhood. It's not a corporate entity. And if we're not careful, it will be looked at by nation state governments as a partnership, as like basically every individual person is on the hook for whatever anyone else does. And that's a very legal situation that we don't want to endanger our members or the custodians in that situation. So we're working with an organization that's being developed in Switzerland as a service provider for the DAC. And it's funny because I got a content piece that I worked on the last couple of days. Hopefully I can publish it today, where it kind of explains a little bit of this. And it's just funny working with the lawyers where we have to be very careful about how we go about this, because we're going to be setting the model hopefully for all these other DACs to come after us, and these are the hard things they haven't figured out yet. How are we going to deal with conflict when someone comes and just says, oh, I want to sue this custodian or whatever, and hopefully the liability will run through that service provider because they're going to be serving the DAC, and the DAC is going to contract with them. And if they're a point of central failure, like in the traditional models. But the nice thing about it is we can always just replace them with a better service provider if they don't meet the needs of the DAC. And they're going to have, via EOS.io, they're going to have their own wallet and their own payment mechanism, so that recommendations of the DAC for who to pay for worker proposal completion will actually be handled by them in their own wallet, so that the money won't be sitting necessarily in their accounts, but it'll be part of the transfer process. And so there's a lot of cool things that we're building. It's just a new way of doing governance without threats of violence, without, these, we're going to lock you up and put you in a cage if you do something wrong. It's more, we're going to have crystal clear agreements that are immutable on a blockchain. They are voluntary contracts between consenting individuals. And it's a beautiful thing. I'm really excited about it.
I mean, I like the idea of the rolling 7 days and the custodians being voted in or out. If ordinary government was like that, we wouldn't have the problems or half the problems we have here, because if you're only there for 7 days or for 6 weeks, whatever it is, it's you actually do your job and then you leave and you go and you're not building castles and building territories. But that's clever.
It's a challenging thing in that it's not like a term limit. Like I imagine that the custodians won't change all that much, kind of like what we're seeing with EOS as well. Like the block producers, it's not even 7 days, it's instantaneous with the EOS IO and delegated proof of stake. It's like, and same thing with Steam. You could be voted out immediately. So that 7 day window is just a way to kind of at least have some structure, because they have to have meetings, they have to coordinate multi-signature transactions to pay out the worker proposals. And so there's some, technical challenges. And we've actually had some people say, oh my gosh, 7 days, that's too short. You should have it be a year or 6 months or, so it's very interesting, all the different perspectives on the best way to do this. But ultimately it's an experiment. We're just going to try some things. And as it works or doesn't work, we're going to iterate the actual software that defines the DAC. And then again, everything we build is open source. So as we make the DAC toolkit available, where anyone eventually, hopefully the vision is you can just click a few buttons and then create your own token, maybe do some airdrops, whatever it is, and create your own community as a DAC very easily. So in the future, my hope is people won't be at parties bragging about their startup. They're instead going to be like, hey, I helped launch a DAC. And now we have this amazing thing that is owned by everyone who participates.
It's a whole different way of looking at life, isn't it? I think that's what we spoke earlier about your philosophy and, be through that word, the L word in there, whatever. But it's a whole different, it's different philosophy. It's where it's shared, it's collaborative. It's your reputation. If you screw up, you're out. And if you do well, you stay in. It's like taking the best of a lot of the things we have, going back to Churchill saying about democracy. If democracy actually was democratic, it might look a bit like this.
Yeah. It's the hope is that we can have democracy without the, and there's been a lot of discussion lately about liquid democracy, where, for example, you could set up a proxy for your voting, and then you could have different categorical proxies. Like we're going to have proxy voting as well. If you don't know which custodians to vote for, we're going to have that. But eventually, it might even get to the point where you could have, like in a liquid democracy model, where you have experts that you trust in very specific categories. So your stake-weighted vote can be proxied to someone within a category. So if it's about something technical, well, then that person could vote on it. But if it's about, let's say, you were mentioning, your passion for social issues, there could be specific people that you trust to make good decisions.
I like that. That actually is very clever, because I was saying earlier before we started recording that I ran for the European Parliament. And when you do that, everybody wants to know your view on everything. Now, I'm quite an opinionated lady, but there were things I didn't quite know what I thought about them. So I'm running around like a lula trying to find out, what do I really think about wind farms? And is this sense, and is this right? Obviously sustainable energy is great, but the way it's been set up here, and there were so many things that I had to learn on very, very quickly to have an answer when I was asked. Obviously there were things that easy peasy, like equality and women's rights and, housing and stuff. Other things I'm going, like, age of voting. Did I have an opinion on what age people should vote? Most kids can't be bothered. Do you want to put that on? Just create more awful? But that's clever.
I think when you recognize that through your personal experience, you're running into what I perceive to be the limitations of hierarchies. We are a species now that is evolving and changing and moving so incredibly quickly. We're this networked, this community-driven organism essentially on the planet, and there's just the looking to leaders to have all the answers. It's
unfair. It's unfair.
It's not only unfair, but it's also very primitive. It's very tribalistic. It's very kind of like, I need mommy and daddy to tell me what to do. And I'm trying to like move our consciousness forward to say, hey, we're all individual consenting adults working together for mutual benefit. We don't have the answers, but as a collective, as an emergent property, we can actually obtain great, rational, logical, valuable outcomes when we let experts in their particular field build reputation and represent our views in certain ways, and at the same time have the ability to still vote as an individual if we disagree. And it's just it's neat because we can have these systems without threats of violence. And I think whenever I look at markets and I look at systems for price discovery and just the way back to just motivations, basic human motivations. Whenever we have threats of violence, they get radically distorted. And then you don't get the consistent outcomes that are predictable and helpful for, future, whatever it is you want to do. And so that's why I'm excited about these, is that there are systems that take a different model. It's about positive incentives and not necessarily like threats of being, put in a cage.
And it's interesting too, I think, as well, because it raises, you mentioned earlier, the whole level of conversation. So it's not just, I'll leave it to the man. People are thinking about, why are we doing this? And even if it's only at a technical level, there is thought put into it, and we have to take personal responsibility for what's happening there, or to understand it, or to delegate, whatever. But you have to take some sort of action as opposed to, just leave it to somebody else to do it.
Absolutely. And it's the hope being, and this is kind of where I get a little deeper into the economics and philosophy of it. The hope being, if we look at it from like a Maslow's hierarchy perspective, as we get more and more people up off of like the basic, food, shelter, clothing, and we get people more up to the top of self-actualization and really kind of being in a position to take that personal responsibility, that is the end goal, improving well-being. Because I think oftentimes a lot of people just live in paycheck to paycheck. They're just trying to stay off the street. And you mentioned, I think before the call, your challenges with, when I was growing up, we lost the house when I was in high school. My parents couldn't pay for it. And I went through a period of living on a boat and just not having much food and money. And I know what that's like. And I've worked hard to get what I have today. But I recognize when you're just barely getting by, you can't think about these like ethical, virtual, philosophical ideals and how you're going to, have representation.
So true. I wrote blog after blog about that, because how do governments keep you down? When I was going through my very tough times, I was on 180 a week from the welfare, for which I was very grateful, I may add, right? But when you've that little money, you're all the time you're thinking about, how do I pay for that? How do I pay for that? And you don't have time to look at the big issues and the big robberies and bad things that are happening, because that's how the kings ruled in olden times. Because you were a feudal slave, and we have modern feudal slaves nowadays.
Absolutely. And again, back to my original kind of intro story of when I really started researching the Federal Reserve System and fiat currency in general, all the way back to the late 1700s. I mean, just this concept of a world reserve currency and how it's been central banking and how it's been pushed forward. It's really kind of eye-opening. And you recognize, when I started looking into that, the trillions of dollars of inflation is essentially keeping people down, and it's a form of theft. And if we have money that we all get, because essentially the way I look at money and cryptocurrency as well, is it's a shared story. It's almost a delusion. It's a agreed upon perspective. And if we all share it, then it works. And we can actually create our own currencies, our own forms of value. And with that, create stories that make sense and actually don't involve theft, and actually might even be slightly deflationary as our, intelligence and our technology improve, where everyone's benefiting. We get all these kind of emergent benefits and properties. And I'm really excited about the potential for cryptocurrency to increase the economic freedom and availability for anyone to participate in. Whether or not they have a bank, and that's another thing why we're excited about Eos Dac and the worker proposal system, is you could be anywhere in the world and say, hey, I can add value to that. And you can build a reputation. And it doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in or anything, to a point. Obviously, I'm very passionate and idealistic, and we do have to think through the governance issues within each jurisdiction. And that's why we have lawyers that are helping us through this process. Yeah. But, these are the things we recognize is that in this new model, you're not limited by your place of birth. You're not limited by your geographic location. And hopefully the ideal being we can create enough economic freedom again to just enable everyone to start thinking about things like governance and philosophy in a way that benefits the world.
Yeah. And you know what I mean? Sometimes I have these arguments with people who are not in the industry, and they go, look at me as if I've got two heads, or, the real hippy dippy, and I go on about, hang on guys, what about the philosophy? Like, capitalism has lost its way. It's all about scarcity. It should be about abundance. There is enough for everybody. People are going, and I'm going, food. There's enough food in the world. We just don't distribute it correctly. I mean, that's a fact. So why is it so strange for somebody to want, or people to want food to be distributed to everybody, and that nobody starves? I mean, I think sometimes we've had this thinking, and again, I raged against the banks here in Ireland, because after the crash, they were shaming people who were failing financially. And they were putting out this narrative about people gaming the system and moral hazard and all this. And I'm going, whoa. And just because they put out that narrative, that's propagated in the media. And people were committing suicide left, right, and center because this narrative was brought forward that if you failed financially, somehow it was your fault. What? What are like poverty? People say, oh, if you're born into poverty, you should work hard and get out of it. Excuse me, the amounts of impediments that are put in front of people who are born on the wrong side of the tracks, who don't have access to proper education, don't have maybe only one parent family, living from, meal ticket to meal ticket, whatever. It is so hard to pull yourself up if you are landed in that side, with very little privilege or advantages, which is where the blockchain comes in.
Yeah. And it's actually, and it's an important philosophical question too. I mentioned earlier that I've been labeled a voluntist or sometimes anarchist. And one of the common questions I ask within that community is, what responsibility do we have to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves? And we could also introduce the veil of ignorance philosophy, where it's like, you don't know what side you would have been born on. You could have just as easily been born into that abusive, single parent family that has no money and is just, bad genetics and everything, worst case scenario. That could have been you. And if that was you, how would you like others who are, won the lottery genetically or financially or whatever, to hopefully give you an opportunity? So I believe in like equality of opportunity. I don't believe in equality of outcome. I think that the Pareto principle, 80-20, like we see this all throughout nature. I don't think we're ever going to have absolute equality, and I don't think we'd ever want it.
I don't say we don't want it either. I don't want to be exactly the same as you and whatever it is that you're doing. No, thank you.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Joseph, going back to that point you said, like I had a very nice upbringing. We weren't terribly well off or anything, but we had enough, and we had a very good education. My father put all his money into education. My mum was a stay-at-home mom. Back in those days, you could do it. 6 kids, wonderful childhood. And I went to private education. I went to Trinity. My first job was at JP Morgan in London. Although I didn't know it, I had privilege coming out of my ears. And I had no idea. I always thought of myself as a very sort of, I'd be a liberal person. I would be, caring, blah, blah. And it wasn't until I fell off the fence and into bankruptcy and destitution and losing houses and being evicted from places and having no money. And I went, oh my God, it is so hard to get out of this pit. How do I get out? And even with all my privilege, I found it took me 10 years to get out, So I totally get that, because unless you've been there, it is very hard to understand what it's like not to have those opportunities.
Yeah. I can remember, like I said, living on a boat and, just like using the oven to heat it because it was so cold, and just having people bring us food because we didn't, I've written a post on how those 2 years really shaped my life in a lot of ways. Yeah. And what I like about EOS and Steam, and even BitShares before that, is Dan Larimer's vision for the delegated proof of stake system is much bigger than just, a blockchain. Like his last 2 Medium posts are about, a universal basic income kind of idea, a universal resource system that is just really interesting. And I wrote a post almost 2 years ago, actually it probably has more than 2 years ago now, about how, does the world need a UBI and can Steam power it? And this idea that we've already seen the failures of centralized corruption and violent nation state governments trying to create welfare systems that, as you said, you appreciated it, but it's also can be used as a mechanism to keep the poor enslaved, where it's like, as they improve, they actually get fewer benefits to the point where it's more beneficial for them to either lie and do stuff, illegally to gain money, or continue becoming,
you're right, that there's a very little member. There's very little incentives to get people off benefits. We have quite a generous benefit system here in Ireland.
And that's designed on purpose. Like they actually know that is a dependable voting class. If they, they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. If they organize that correctly, they're going to stay in power. And so that's why I like the idea of a blockchain-based system where the consensus mechanisms and the rules are distributed across every member. And therefore, we can build something that's mutually beneficial, hopefully reaching a Nash equilibrium, this idea that we all win and we could solve the coordination problem. I think it's another thing that blockchains do is in game theory, it's very difficult to get everybody to coordinate to choose an answer where everybody wins. It's very, very challenging. But with the transparency, the interoperability, these are some of the really neat aspects of blockchain technology. And I think that Dan Larimer is one of the people out there who really understand this and are thinking about it from a philosophical perspective. So we can solve some of these problems.
Yeah, and certainly much better than half of the systems we have in place currently. Just, people despair. They say we can't change it. So they just go out on a Friday night and hit the pub, whatever, because you can't change it. That's the feeling. And I think that blockchain, and I know I'm like a child, it's blockchain, woo! But I genuinely believe it can work. It can make huge changes. And the nice thing is that it's from the bottom up and not from the top down, because that top down stuff doesn't work.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this is why I sold my business this year. This is why I'm so passionate about Eos Dac, and why I've been working so hard to try to build these systems so that anybody, any community can come together, voluntarily create their own decentralized autonomous community, and actually create their own, store of value, their own token, their own projects, whatever they agree upon within their community as a story of value they can do. And I look at this as, a lot of times when people get passionate about activism or this, that, and the other, they get asked the question, well, what are you actually doing? Like, how are you actually making a difference? And for me, it's like every day I'm adding a little bit of value to the Eos Dac community. So if my call to action for our listeners, if I could be allowed, would be to grab some Eos Dac tokens. I mean, if you don't have any, you only need one, and they're trading for like 2 pennies right now. I think, I could send you some if you need them, but just get some tokens, join the DAC, register as a member, and then actually participate. And I think if we can prove this model with Eos Dac, and then we can start building out tools for other people to use to build their own DACs, I think we really have a shot to demonstrate something that people can look at as being concrete. So it's not just this ethereal blockchain-y thing, crypto fake internet money, but it's actually like, oh, wait, here's a community and they're accomplishing great things and they have economic freedom, and wow, let's participate.
Oh, I think it's amazing. Wow. So where are you at in the stage now with your DAC? So you've built constitution, you're putting in place smart contracts, or where are you?
Yes. I'm really excited about the progress we've made. So we've been functioning as a DAC for a couple months now. So we have, I mentioned earlier, members.eosdac.io is where you can go to register as a member of the DAC. And we have the token smart contract, which manages like membership, registering as a member and using your tokens, transferring tokens, all the kind of basic token stuff is in that contract. We have another smart contract for the DAC custodian contract that manages setting up your own profile as a member of the community, registering as a custodian, staking your EOS Dac tokens, and letting the community know like what you want to get paid, because that EOS Dac custodian position is actually a paid position. And then from there, we also built in voting. And so voting is disabled as of this call when we're talking right now, but it should hopefully be enabled very soon. We're looking to get, our constitution requires 15% engagement with the token holders to become members. So that and then also we want to allow enough time for people to register as custodians, those who want to help lead the DAC. And then we'll open up voting. And then the next piece that we're currently doing in an Excel spreadsheet, it's still transparent and everybody can see it. We're all about radical transparency. But what's being done in a spreadsheet right now and a Google form is just like people submit their worker proposals, and the kind of Genesis custodians, the people that first were involved in launching this, are still approving those. But in the future, we'll have those worker proposals completely on chain. That's our third major smart contract that we're developing right now. And once that's on chain and we have the custodians in place, they will do the multi-signature agreement to make the suggestion for the service provider to make those payments. And the service provider is actually going to have contractual agreements with each one of those individuals. So that's the part that's a little bit of a bummer, in that we kind of have to go back to the centralized way, because a lot of jurisdictions will see that as employment. And there's, all kinds of drama with employment law to make sure that don't put anybody at risk. So we're going to be pushing the space forward. Lawyers want to see things like DocuSign and, like identity papers being moved back and forth. And I'm like currently pushing like, hey, can we maybe do this on chain and just use cryptographic signatures? I think we're just going to keep innovating, and hopefully the governments will catch up.
That's amazing. Well, that has been a pleasure chatting. I think I chatted too much, actually. You've been, that's an exciting idea. Oh, I like that idea. That rings true with me. So I think what you're doing is amazing. I think the DAC is just the whole concept of it is fabulous. I wish governments worked like that, actually, because it would make it so much nicer.
And hopefully someday they will.
No, I think you're right. I think it's a way to manage ourselves, and whatever it is, whether it's it's business or it's government or it's housing or healthcare, whatever. I love this idea. So I'm going to thank you again, Luke. Tell people, where can they find you if they want to go and have a chat with you or look at what you're doing.
I'm all over the place, pretty active on Twitter at Luke Stokes. And as I said, I'm active on Steemit as Luke Stokes. I'm also in kind of all the different channels, Telegram and that and the other. The place that I would love to engage with you most would be the Eos Dac Discord. So if you go to eosdac.io, and there'll be a link to our Discord channel there. That's kind of where we're building our community on a day-to-day basis, where we're chatting and stuff. So we have our Discord server there. And I would love to chat with people more. I'm also a proxy on Eos, Luke Eos Proxy. if you haven't voted yet for EOS block producers and you're not really sure who to vote for, that's an account that you might want to set as a proxy.
Excellent.
And thank you again for the opportunity. I really
No, thank you. It was really enjoyable. And I didn't know that much. Well, I had one interview before about a DAC. This is my second one. So I'm getting up to speed very quickly on it. And I love them. I love the idea. It's just a breath of fresh air.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. Thank you.